I love you.
I know.
Welcome to the Hollywood in Toto podcast, the right take on entertainment. The HiT cast offers a weekly look at Hollywood from a conservative point of view. Sick of media bias infecting Hollywood headlines? Tired of stars insulting your views? HiT has your back. Now, here's your host, Christian Toto.
Welcome to episode 142 of the Hollywood in Toto podcast, the right take on entertainment. This week we talk with Nicholas Brennan, the director of the new film Los Ultimos Frikis. The documentary captures a legendary metal band trying to survive in Fidel Castro's Cuba. You can only imagine the obstacles in these rockers' way. I wanted to start the show with a little confession. The HiT cast goes live every Friday at about 5 p.m. Mountain Time. But I missed not just last Friday, but a few weeks ago, too. Not cool. My schedule's been crazy lately, not just the holidays, just lots and lots of work piling up, and I have to say, I just didn't plan properly. Now, I not only run HollywoodInToto.com and this podcast, but I contribute to Newsbusters, The Daily Wire, The Complete Colorado, Bongino.com, and a few other great sites. And more recently, I've joined the cast of The Daily Report on America's Voice. You can check that out on Roku, Apple TV, and other fine sources of entertainment. Plus, I co-host 2 hour-long radio shows here in Denver. I'm exhausted, I have to say, but I love what I do. My wife has been so kind and thoughtful to let me do this and to let me build this little mini empire I have, and 2019 has been a very good year for me. But I'm also blessed to be able to make a career out of what I really care about the most, talking entertainment. And I guess that's a sappy way of saying this show is going nowhere. I vow as we head into 2020 that my skips in the schedule will be few and far between, if at all. Hollywood in Toto, the website actually, is having a makeover soon, and the HiT cast is going to sound a little different in the weeks to come as well. You're still going to get the same features you come to know and, well, I hope you love, but we'll have new theme song going on and a lot of other bells and whistles to add to the fun. And now, to our regularly scheduled programming. Two recent movies arrive with a profound partisan baggage. The first is Richard Jewell, Clint Eastwood's film correcting the record on the unfairly maligned security guard, Richard Jewell. The second is Bombshell, the latest Hollywood take on Roger Ailes' downfall. Because we didn't need just 2 films about that, we needed 3. Now, most critics have been fair and kind to Richard Jewell. Very positive reviews for the most part. It's also one of my favorite films of the year. A few critics haven't been so kind, and I'm not talking about disagreeing with it for artistic reasons. The show notes page at HollywoodInToto.com has a link to one review you've got to read to believe. Wow. The critic essentially says, well, it's a good story, it's well told, the performances are excellent, I like the pacing, Eastwood does a masterful job recreating that bombing, but, well, there are other reasons I hate it. It's amazing. But I want to focus more on Bombshell right now. Now, the film is as cartoonishly anti-Fox News as you imagine. And I have to say, that's a shame. The movie comes alive at about the hour mark. It's almost like they get all their talking points they wanted out of the way, and all of a sudden it becomes a savvy look at how sexual predators thrive in a corporate climate. That's an important story, and at times it's well told here, after a while. Now, most critics, of course, are weaponizing their reviews to bash Fox News. It's not professional, but it's what you expect. But what I didn't see coming, and I'm kind of kicking myself for being so naive, is another line of attack against the film. In short, why should we care about these women? After all, they're conservatives. Really? Here's one pull quote from Slate's review of Bombshell. No one deserves to be harassed at work, and the fact that these women banded together to bring down an enormously powerful and malignant man is admirable. That doesn't mean I want to spend 2 hours gazing at Megyn Kelly's seemingly poreless face as she wrestles with whether and how to tell her truth, while continuing to play a highly public part in a media ecosystem based on lies. Whew. You know, the media's unrelenting hatred for Fox News means that the women who were assaulted by Roger Ailes all those years aren't worth our sympathies, am I right? Well, it's kind of the same reason Trump fans are getting beaten up across the country, even if they're children. And it doesn't warrant much, if any, media coverage. It's gross. It's despicable. And that message is loud and clear in some of the sorriest reviews of Bombshell. And now here's the hit tweet of the week. This week's winner is George Takei. Yes, Star Trek Sulu is weighing in on the 2020 presidential campaign. And he's clearly a little nervous about the Democratic contenders. Here's his tweet. Any one of these candidates is strong enough to beat Trump if we commit to rally around them, should they become the nominee, that is. If we Democrats don't tear them apart first. Most of us aren't going to get the candidate we prefer. I suggest we be prepared to get over it. Worried, George? Yeah, you should be.
Please subscribe to my daddy's podcast. If he gets 100 new listeners, he'll stop forcing me to record these spots.
This week's hit tip of the week is Marriage Story. Now, the film is getting lots of Oscar season buzz, and understandably so. And I usually reserve this slot in the show for lesser-known titles, things you haven't been hearing about nonstop. But bear with me, I think this one deserves a little extra attention. Now, there are definitely going to be people who don't want to watch Marriage Story. It's about a couple going through a divorce. It's ugly and painful and raw. A good friend of mine watched the first 20 minutes and, well, he pulled the ripcord. Others on Twitter are saying how eager they are to avoid watching Marriage Story at all costs. I gotta say it's a mistake. Scarlett Johansson and Adam Driver are excellent as an artsy couple going their separate ways. The writing here is brisk and bold, and the supporting players are just as good as the main stars. Loved watching Ray Liotta here. He's excellent, but I have to say special kudos to Laura Dern. It might be the best performance of her big screen career. She plays the kind of divorce lawyer you want on your side. And if you see her on your spouse's side, you're going to say a whole bunch of prayers that it goes over quickly because she brings it. Now, I get it. Marriage Story is not the kind of movie you want to watch on a breezy Saturday night. It's not fun. It's not exciting. It's not a roller coaster ride. It's challenging. And it's going to leave you wanting to talk about its themes for quite a while. But like the best art, it's enriching and kind of life-affirming. Now, you're not going to expect a happy ending in the traditional sense. And that's not a spoiler. If you watch this movie for about 5 minutes, you know essentially where things are headed. But there is some hope, there is some healing that's baked into the story. Marriage Story is a new Netflix film, a Netflix original, vying for Oscar glory. It's also one of the best Netflix movies you've seen in quite some time.
Political Spirits, the weekly conservative podcast that says the left and right should have a few drinks and talk. The only podcast that intersperses commentary with the sound of pouring alcohol. Host Franklin Rye, an experienced governmental affairs professional, offers analysis, commentary, and conservative solutions mixed in with amusing anecdotes about the sausage-making process. Ever wonder how democracy is like a Chevy Suburban? Did the Beatles really write conservative songs? How a Democrat politician is like the Arquillians in Men in Black. Add to that occasional historical episodes with a patriotic bent, kept at 30 minutes or less, perfect for a commute, and you have a podcast recipe to serve conservatives, political news and opinion junkies, and those who just wonder how on earth we reached the point where so many in our country think patriotism is a dirty word. Please join us at Political Spirits. That's politicalspirits.libsyn.com or on Twitter at Franklin Rye.
You know, it's been a while since we checked in with Freedonia's Jim Culver. Let's fix that. I just chatted with Jim about this year's woke movie disasters, bomb after bomb after bomb. He's got some good insights into the matter, as well as hope that Hollywood is finally getting the message. Stop with the lectures. I'm not so sure. I hope Jim's right. But here's my conversation with Freedonia's Jim Culver. Well, Jim, welcome back to the show. And, listen, it's the end of 2019. This time of year, we always do that recap, a look back at what happened in films, what was good, what was bad. But I thought we'd have you on specifically to talk about the woke bombs of 2019, because there were a few of them, and I think they're rather illustrative of what's going on in Hollywood right now.
And they were legion, yeah. I definitely felt like this year was, the year that Hollywood went all in on going woke. There's no doubt about it. I mean, you've got, these big franchise movies like Captain Marvel, Charlie's Angels, Terminator, X-Men, Dark Phoenix, and I'm no doubt the upcoming Star Wars. All these big budget movies went that route. And then, you had smaller movies. You had a really, really good list on your website, and then smaller movies like Hustle and Booksmart, Long Shot, all these smaller movies that should have been really about their story, but were very, very woke as well. And, they really aren't making a whole lot of money. A lot of them are just bombing outright. And, you're just kind of waiting for Hollywood to learn at some point, learn their lesson. But, so it was definitely a big year for that. It kind of felt like, it was they were kind of all over the place. But I mean, the good news is that a lot of them bombed, and it's really not a sustainable business model to keep pushing them out like this. So
is there
there's only. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Is there one particular film that jumps out at you? Maybe listen, we could detail all the reasons why they were woke, but I think maybe just picking one film and kind of highlighting what it did would be maybe the best way to illustrate it. You pick one and why it sort of went in that direction.
Well, I mean, probably the most high-profile one recently was Charlie's Angels, and that was it wasn't really a remake that anybody was really asking for, but excuse me, but there, it had been successful in the past, and there were a lot of good directions they could have gone with it. I think it was really well known and had been well known for decades for just being kind of a fun action comedy series, and then this version took it in such a different direction, such a political direction, and it was very in your face with messaging about women can do whatever a man can do, and all the male characters were either jerks or evil or completely ineffectual, and it was just very, very heavily tilted, and it wasn't any fun. And that was what it came down to was, Charlie's Angels is supposed to be fun. It's been fun since the 70s, and it's really not fun to be lectured and preached to, and so it just sucked all the fun out of it. And I think it was very obvious about it looking at the trailers or up front. It was very clear about what it wanted to be.
What's interesting about Charlie's Angels is that you're right, the brand is fun, and they went away from the brand. But more importantly, it's a movie about female spies that on the surface, without any tinkering, is technically empowering and pro-women and something we don't see every day. So I think you play it straight, have fun, and then the audience get the message, hey, women can be superheroes and spies and can kick butt and take names. And, you don't need to tinker. You don't need to alter a syllable. But they couldn't let it alone. I think that's the real lesson is that, if you want to tell a story, you tell a story. And if there are themes there that are empowering, great. No one is complaining about movies like Alien, where Ripley is the heroine. And no one is complaining about other films of its ilk, where the females are in charge. It's when the lectures start. That's when we kind of go, oh, yeah, that's I'm not feeling that. And I think Hollywood doesn't get that message.
Well, yeah, and I think that's one of those instances where I think it crosses the Rubicon, if you will, from non-woke to woke. Is being empowering really isn't woke in and of itself. I think a lot of people are on board with that. It's when it crosses the line to being anti-male or to knocking down men. I mean that's sexist, and so that's that is more what we consider to be really woke, and that's what turns people off. And is you get past this positive thing into something negative.
Well, when you look back on The Last Jedi, and I mentioned Jedi because The Rise of Skywalker is coming in a few days, I thought that Oscar Isaac, who's a very good actor, tons of charisma, I thought when they introduced him in The Force Awakens, I'm like, hey, there's the new Han Solo. We needed a roguish character. And then The Last Jedi comes along and not only doesn't really use him well, but basically berates him with the female cast members. So, it's what are you doing? It's so obvious what the agenda is, and it really hurts things. I think we're both dancing around this subject. Maybe you can kind of clarify it. I don't think Hollywood learns the lesson yet. I don't think they sit back and say, hey, a lot of these progressive films didn't do well. A lot of the lecturing seemed to fall flat. Maybe we shouldn't do that. Or am I wrong? Do you think that on some level Hollywood is getting the message that this is not what we want?
I think they are on some level. I mean, a good example would be Ghostbusters, which got obviously a very woke reboot about 3 years ago. And obviously nobody came out and admitted that they had miscalculated with that, and they closed ranks, as they always do when they got criticized. But the proof is in what they come out with in the future, and so the next film is obviously looking very non-woke. It looks more like just kind of a fun mix of Stranger Things and Ghostbusters, and there's no identity politics that we can see. So I don't think they're going to just own up to what they did. I think they're going to very quietly make a lot of changes like that, where they get their franchises back on track. I think that it's very hard to get through to Hollywood because they follow trends, and they tend to make movies about 3 years out, following these trends. And so it takes them a long time to wake up to realize that these trends aren't working, and this has happened, it happened back in the 70s with the Easy Rider type movies that, ticket sales tanked when those kind of movies started coming out. Ticket sales were down like 60 or 70%, I think, back in the 70s. And then it happened again in the early 2000s with the Iraq War, and they made all those Iraq War movie bombs that nobody wanted to see. But it takes them some time to kind of wake up and realize that they really aren't capturing any movement that's going to go see their movies. And I think that's what they did with the culture war. They saw the culture war, and they said, "Oh, look at all these social justice warriors on Twitter talking about representation. These are all ticket buyers." And so they went out and made all these kind of movies pandering to them, but they didn't really understand their audience. And so I think they're kind of waking up to the fact that people are not buying tickets to these movies, and they're not going to buy tickets to these movies. And there certainly are people in Hollywood that are just out ideologues that are probably not going to change because they see it as kind of like, when you move the Overton window, you're talking about changing what's acceptable to talk about. And I think they're trying to do that with our culture. Mm-hmm. They're trying to get more and more blatant about these messages because they think that will make it more acceptable to push them in the future. So I think you certainly have that element in Hollywood, but I think at the end of the day, there's a lot of people that are that care about their jobs, and they care about succeeding, and you can only fail so much before you have to change course. Yeah, I think it'll probably take a couple more years, but they're going to get there.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, thank you, Jim. I appreciate you breaking this down for us. And I think you're a little more optimistic than I am, but I do agree. I think the Ghostbusters lesson is a bit of a course correction, so I'm glad to see that. And I don't think they're going to do a bait and switch there. I don't think they can kind of push a trailer that seems completely apolitical and back to the fun and then give us a woke Ghostbusters Afterlife. But you never know. I wouldn't push anything past Hollywood, but
I don't think so, because they picked Jason Reitman to direct it, and he's known for making some pretty politically incorrect movies like Thank You for Smoking and Up in the Air, and so he might put some liberal messages in his movies, but he doesn't strike me as the kind of person who would go woke. So he's more focused on storytelling, and obviously being the son of Ivan Reitman, I think he is someone you can trust to actually tell a good story.
Yeah, so. Daddy's legacy is first and foremost in his mind. But well, thanks again, Jim. Again, you can find Jim Culver's work at threedonia.com. There'll be a link to that great site on the show notes page at hollywoodintoto.com. Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, and let's talk again real soon.
Merry Christmas to you. Thanks for having me on.
Well, as I said earlier, we've missed a couple of episodes, so I've got another guest commentator on board. Jim Lakely is from the Heartland Institute, and he weighs in on one of the craziest movie debates I've seen in a while. It involves Ford versus Ferrari. Jim also talks about Jerry Seinfeld, not just his comedy, but how he could strike a death blow to PC police and all their crazy activities. I don't think it'll happen, but I think Jim's got a great point to be made here. I hope you enjoyed this chat as well. Well, Jim, welcome back to the HitCast. You and I had an email exchange recently, which I thought was obviously perfect fodder for the show. And it starts with Ford versus Ferrari, the new movie with Matt Damon and Christian Bale. And, of course, that's a really good film. It could be Oscar-worthy. We'll know in a few weeks. And the story is fascinating. But some critics have had issues with it. So I want you to maybe dig in from there, take the story to the next stage, and express why you were so outraged by the outrage, because I think it's kind of funny.
Well, yeah, there was the story that I shared with you, Christian, was a story by Douglas McKinnon in the Daily Caller that was pointing out that some liberal leftist movie critics were not very happy with the way Ford versus Ferrari depicted history, the actual history of what happened in that very famous. Well, now it's more famous. A lot of people actually didn't know about it, but in the history of the development of the automobile. And in racing, it was a huge moment. Yet, you had progressive websites attacking it as, quote, the climate change horror film that nobody needed, and that it was laced with xenophobia and white masculinity. And another Bloomberg News author criticized the movie, writing that it was, quote, a devastating picture of the lack of diversity that permeated the automobile industry in the 1960s. And the author also added, when I say men, I mean white, straight men, and that Ford versus Ferrari shows a generation best left dead and gone.
Ouch.
Now,
and by the way, how dare they assume the gender of everyone in the movie? That seems inappropriate.
Well, it does. But hey, facts are facts. I mean, it was mostly men working in the engineering department of Ford Motor Company and of course, Carroll Shelby was the developer of the race car for the 24 Hours Le Mans, which won the race. Oh, I'm sorry, spoiler alert. I don't think they'd make the movie if Ferrari won, so you could probably figure that out by yourself. But I keep thinking, Christian, that we're gonna reach peak wokeness and peak absurdity of injecting today's the moral standards of the woke left today, which, by the way, are not the moral standards of the majority of Americans, but injecting this into the past, decades, even hundreds of years in the past. And if it doesn't quite measure up to the radical left's idea of being woke enough, it has to be dismissed as not even good art. You shouldn't even see it, and it should be slammed as not being being misogynistic, or is this like xenophobia and too much white masculinity? Here's a newsflash. Muscular, macho men loved racing cars. That's where it comes from. It's a thing that guys like to do, and they like to do that in the 1960s as well. It just amazes me. I didn't see any pushback from the filmmakers on any of this far leftist woke reviews of their movie, and really the unfairness of upbraiding a movie or criticizing it because it doesn't meet the gender and sex and class standards that the woke left has today. It just is a fact that there weren't female engineers or female race car drivers in the 1960s in the 24 Hours Le Mans. That's okay. It's okay to look at that in the past and enjoy it as art, and maybe even learn a little bit about the history of that time.
Yeah, it's amazing, the silence from Hollywood. And, I've covered this a bit at my website about free speech issues, where I feel like there are a handful of comedians, maybe Rob Schneider, Adam Carolla, but most of the Hollywood left is just stone cold silent on issues about free speech and being able to tell the stories you want to tell. And this is a great example. We've seen also with Todd Phillips, the director of the movie Joker. He came out and said, well, I don't think the woke standards are helping comedy. It's hurting comedy. It's one of the reasons why I don't make funny movies anymore. And, of course, the usual think pieces rose up about how dare he and he's behind the times. Well, guess what didn't rise up? No one from his community said, hey, I think Todd has a point, or even I think Todd should be able to express that point. They were silent. They said nothing. And I think they either silently agree or they're scared to death. And it's a really weird time, especially when you have the big players in Hollywood. What would it cost a Matt Damon to say, hey, this was history. Let us tell it.
Right.
Go pound sand. I think I'd make him my new hero if he said that. But they don't do anything like that.
Right. I mean, I don't think we're going to get reform and really, a lack of insanity in Hollywood unless some of the people on the left, and Matt Damon is a man of the left, it's his own movie. He might have an Oscar nomination for this. I'm sure he enjoyed making the film. And, working with Christian Bale can sometimes be a challenge, but they created this film that's getting a lot of great reviews, except for from the radical left. And it would be a huge moment in our culture if Matt Damon would just say, look, come on, cut it out. Just enjoy the movie for what it is. It depicts history, of course, with creative license, and this is an important story to tell. But we're not having that. We don't have that at all. In fact, later in this story from the Daily Caller, the author talked about how after Steven Spielberg's Saving Private Ryan, which will 100 years from now, people will still be watching that film, and it's a celebration of the incredible bravery and selflessness of the greatest generation, especially those who stormed the beaches of Normandy during World War II. And look, no women stormed those beaches. It just didn't work out that way. These were young men in the prime of their lives that gave their lives to save Western civilization. Now, the woke left today doesn't think much of Western civilization, and they certainly wouldn't think it was worth saving. But there hasn't been any pushback on Saving Private Ryan. But that movie did more than anything really to help push forward the idea that we needed a World War II memorial in Washington, D.C. I was living there at the time, and it was kind of foundering. It wasn't good. It wasn't really getting the momentum it needed. That movie really helped push it over the finish line. And in fact, they reached out to Steven Spielberg and asked him, if we were raising money, if we could just get, you to give some of the money so we can say that you donated, then a lot of other donations would come in. Steven Spielberg said, well, how much do you need? They told him the amount. The next day, a personal check from Steven Spielberg was written and given, and there you go. They were on their way. It would be nice if instead of giving money, and that's to be admired, that they actually spent some of their social capital to push back on the woke left that is really destroying creativity and destroying cinema by requiring that everything meet these kind of woke standards that are not interesting and not fun, and are really antithetical to enjoying yourself at the movies.
Yeah, I think actually doing that, speaking out, is more costly in a weird way than I'm sure that very large check that Stephen so nicely wrote and gave to the cause. It's really fascinating. And again, stars are more political than ever. They talk about every issue that matters, except the ones that you think would be directly tied to their own license, their own community, their own artistic endeavors. How could they possibly be silent? And, we've seen enough examples where if you don't back down, if you don't apologize, nothing really happens. I remember, maybe a year or two ago, the woke police came after Jamie Foxx for something he either said or didn't said. He ignored it. The story went away because that's the way the news cycle works now. Just ignore it, batten down the hatches, and it'll go away because the woke crowd will be upset about something else. And one last quick thought on the woke police. What they deem important, if not essential, today, I guarantee it's going to change tomorrow, the next week, or next year because the standards are so fluid on the left. They don't have any sort of hard and fast rules. It's almost like they're making it up as they go along. Years ago, a comedian could be in blackface if he was playing a specific character. Now that's unacceptable. I wonder what's happening today in the comedy scene that will be deemed unacceptable in 5 years, 10 years. I think I'll be shocked, but not completely surprised.
I think you would think almost everything that's said today would be unacceptable in 10 or 15 years at this rate. I mean, can you imagine even one of the most important and groundbreaking comedy films of all time, of course, was Eddie Murphy's Raw from 1983 or something like that, early 80s. If you watch that today, that entire routine has to be thrown out. George Carlin, genius. Most of his routines are extremely problematic today. And this is where, woke movies and injecting social justice warrior messaging into films and doing it on purpose, which a lot of people in Hollywood are doing, is turning out to be a pretty money-losing proposition. And so, eventually they might learn from the free market that you can't keep doing this and have people interested in seeing your quote unquote art, and because they want to have fun, they want to enjoy it, they don't want to be lectured to all the time. Yeah, I think. But at some point, you would think if money can't motivate you, how about your creativity? How about your creative voice? And when enough artists understand that their voice is next, their voice will be silenced next, that would be the turning point. And I think you're seeing some comedians, of course, Dave Chappelle, the great example, his special just annoyed the woke police to no end when it came out, but audiences loved it. Bill Burr, not quite as famous as Dave Chappelle, but he had a fantastic special on Netflix as well. He went right at him, right directly at the woke police, and it was hilarious. And the audience laughed, and he doesn't seem to care what people think because he just wants to be funny. That kind of mindset needs to grow, not just in comedy, but all across our culture. Yeah, and I think what needs to happen, sadly, is for the people on the left to get bitten
to get pulled over by the PC police. Just a quick example. Sarah Silverman, a couple of years ago, I covered at my website. She talked about, well, the PC police and sort of all these woke expressions. It's the young people telling us what to do and sort of course correcting, and it's important and it's good. That was her then. Then more recently, she lost a film role because she was in blackface 10 years ago on her TV show. It wasn't meant to be insensitive. It was actually trying to be illustrative of racism. She has since apologized, but it was not enough. So all of a sudden you hear her saying, wow, maybe this is kind of a dangerous trend. Why? Because she got pulled over. Yeah. And until that happened, she was happy as a clam to just go forward and, give them all the applause that they needed and say they're doing the right thing. But then when it hit her, she had a whole new change of thinking. And it's why I think sometimes people on the left have to kind of face the music like people on the right are, and then they'll wake up and then they'll understand, hey, this could happen to anybody. Because you're saying it, you're right, but until they feel it, I don't think they change their behavior.
And I think you need an emperor has no clothes moment. You need that person to point and say that this is crazy, and maybe that'll be the moment that wakes everybody up. I mean, I just mentioned Eddie Murphy. He has a bit of a comeback going on right now with his Dolomite movie that I think got a Golden Globe Award. It's going to be getting lots of awards. He might even get an Oscar nomination. Who knows? But if Eddie Murphy would come out and say, that's enough. I don't want to hear it anymore. And really almost even did a whole routine on it. Somebody of that stature, that might actually finally end this stuff. Because I really do believe, we all should hope that in 5 to 10 years, Christian, you're worried about what the woke police will be coming up with then. I hope that in 10 or 15 years, we'll be looking back at this time and be thinking it's as nuts as the reefer madness kind of things in the 1950s. It was just this moment that lasted quite a while, but it was just a moment of absolute madness, and we've recovered from it since then, hopefully.
Yeah, I think you're more optimistic than I am. I don't know if we're quite there yet or heading in the direction, but you're right about we need like someone of the stature of an Eddie Murphy to say stop. And it's why Jerry Seinfeld caused such a commotion when he said, I don't play colleges. That was like 4 years ago. And those comments reverberated around pop culture because we were so in love with him and his talent, and because we knew that he was about the squeakiest clean comic you could imagine. So when he's saying the young people are out of control, then it means something. It's not like Sam Kinison saying, oh, this crowd got out of hand because I was too wild. It's right. Seinfeld. And when he said it, people really stood up and took notice.
Yep.
Any last thoughts on the subject before we let you go, Jim?
Well, no, just one last thought then. I was thinking when you mentioned Seinfeld, he says he won't do college campuses anymore. That's the exact wrong thing to do. He needs to do the college campuses, and he needs to do an entire routine on what the hell's wrong with you kids. And he needs to go from campus to campus to campus. That actually would have a huge effect, because I think a lot of, if you're young and you're free and you're just starting out in your life as an adult in college, you should be open to new ideas. You should be able to take risks. You should be able to be offended. And maybe a comedy routine by the likes of Jerry Seinfeld going from campus to campus would remind these kids that the people telling them to be woke are the people that actually kind of trying to control their minds. And if you have any thoughts of yourself, and you should at the age of about 20, you should be rejecting all of that. And I think the youth today need to be reminded that they're not thinking independently. They're being herded. They're being herded into a mindset in which they're not allowed to think. That's not healthy.
Yeah, that's a great point. Jerry Seinfeld, if canceled, can go back to his home and just have money fights with his family, because he is loaded. So even if they tried to cancel him, it wouldn't really matter. But they wouldn't, because he would say, "The heck with you! I've got whatever my legacy is. I got all the money in the world. You can't do anything to me." And that would be a great, I dare to say, middle finger to this culture, this community, and it's what we need. So, hey Jim, thanks so much. I appreciate you chiming in with all these great ideas and thoughts, and we hope we will chat with you more in 2020.
I hope so too. Love your podcast. Thanks, Christian.
You're listening to the Hollywood in Toto podcast, the right take on entertainment.
There's little doubt we're living in a golden age of documentary films. I partially credit that to Michael Moore. As crazy as that sounds, he really gave documentary films a higher profile, as it were, even though he's kind of basically crushed it whenever he's behind the camera. But I also blame Netflix. They've got a really great lineup of documentary films all across different subjects, some political, some not political, and they get a lot of attention. Many times I'm talking to people, talking to my friends, and they say, you know what I saw on Netflix? And it's not just the movies, it's the documentaries. I think that's a very cool trend. They also can't wait for this movie, Los Ultimos Frikis, to hit Netflix or a similar streaming service down the road. Now, it's coming soon to theaters, but for now, I wanted to talk to the filmmaker behind it. His name is Nicholas Brennan, and his film follows the Cuban rockers Zeus as the band tries to make music in a culture where rock doesn't roll so easily. The state in Cuba doesn't like rock music, or anyone being too creative for that matter. It's the kind of stifling atmosphere found in too many socialist utopias. But these rockers won't be denied. How cool is that? Now, Nick talks about how he got to know the band members and some of the amazing obstacles the rockers endured over their career. Nicholas Brennan is making a smart, interesting movie that talks a lot about music and culture and socialist life. It's kind of scary, and I hope you enjoy our conversation. Well, Nick, I wanted to start it by finding out a little bit about you and your film background. I saw some IMDb credits, and it sounds like you've had a couple of interesting gigs along the way. Tell us a little bit about how you entered Hollywood, and also, was directing your ultimate goal, or was that sort of a happy accident at this point?
Yeah, I think I've finished in storytelling and telling particularly documentary stories and stories from sort of the real world, our real world. Since I was a kid, I grew up in Maine, so my start really came in ski films and snowboard films. Is really how I got started, just capturing our stories, and then that has sort of grown into really a focus on international storytelling and stories from around the world.
Excellent. Now, when you encountered Zeus, the band, and you're thinking, gosh, this would be a great subject for a documentary, did they trust you to tell their story right away? Was there sort of a getting to know you process? Because I know they're trusting you with a lot. It's not just a typical band getting a profile. There are consequences if you do the wrong thing, if you kind of expose them in the wrong way. Talk about sort of that relationship and how it began.
Yeah, certainly. And I think that was a really important part of the storytelling in the process of making this film. And really, I think one of the reasons why the film takes place over so many years is it's really about building trust and gathering an understanding of the story and sort of the collaboration as we get the film to its finished place. But actually, the first the way I met the band and the way that we were sort of introduced to each other was during when I was in college. I did a study abroad program in Havana, so I had an opportunity to spend 3 months there. Making a series of short films, working alongside some of the top young Cuban artists and filmmakers. It was really a great program through NYU's film school. And through that process, I met this band. I sort of stumbled upon a heavy metal show, which really sort of blew my mind. And it felt quite similar to the concerts I went to as a kid, in Portland, Maine, where you'd see, the bright lights and the super tight band playing really great music on stage. And you're like, whoa, this feels just like what it felt like as a teenager growing up with the angst of small town Maine. But of course, you look around and you're like, wait a second, I'm in Cuba, and the people around you have grown up in a totally different context. And that really sort of is what caught my eye and grabbed my heart on this story. And I'd made a short film, spent a few weeks filming with the band on that trip. That was back in 2009, and was able to make a short film that really sort of told the band's story in in about a 10 minute sort of profile of the band. And then we brought that back to the U.S. and we premiered that at Tribeca in 2010. And so that through that, the band sort of had a sense of the storytelling approach and the way I would tell their story. But as we went down in 2011, 2012, as we were really starting the opportunity to tell the larger story, because I always knew that the band had a much more profound story that went way beyond that 10 minutes could ever do. Yeah. We had sort of long conversations around what would be entailed with telling the feature and the sort of significantly greater level of intimacy and trust that would be required, and also obviously a much bigger commitment from them to really sort of open up their doors. And the lead singer said, Nick, we totally 100% support this. We think it's a great opportunity for us to really share our stories, but you have to tell a true story. He's like, we're on board 100%. But you have to tell the true story, and that telling of the true story in a way that allows audience to really understand Zeus's story and the sort of context of the band in Cuba and what it means to be a metal band in Cuba is certainly what the hard work and the process was for making Los Ultimos Frikis.
Well, talking about context, I want to maybe just you can state this accurately for me. The Cuban government thought that rock and roll music was a capitalistic threat. Can you kind of share what that means? I mean, what's the how do you break?
Yeah, so it's a very amazing point, and I think what I've found interesting, and I try to find similarities and sort of shared bridges between our different cultures and different histories. In the U.S., we had this great fear in the 50s of Satan's music. Oh my God, the hips are shaking. What that looked like in Cuba in the 70s and 80s was, oh my God, there's this invasion of capitalist influence. The kids are wearing jeans. They're going to grow out their long hair. This must be shut down. And what you saw in the 70s, 80s, and 90s is you saw very much a rejection of rock and roll and sort of a repression where rock bands were shut down. You didn't have really a place to play. You couldn't really be a professional rock and roll musician and gather a following, gather fans, and gather a livelihood. And that was very much rock and roll being seen as something foreign and something that was there to be subversive, which, of course, as young people, that's one of the greatest attractions of rock and roll is its rebellious voice.
That's the whole selling point. So
that's sort of the whole point of rock and roll. Yeah.
There's a scene early in the film where the band's guitarist is saying, "Hey, I got to shut this part of the interview down. I can't get anything remotely political. I'll be visited." When I saw that, I understand that it's obviously a critical point. But were you or your crew ever in danger or threatened or anything like that while you were making the movie?
No, we certainly weren't. We certainly didn't face, sort of an overt fear of being shut down or anything. Because we had the short film, there was sort of an understanding that we were doing a story about this band, and we had the sort of, the permits and sort of the understanding of what we were making. But certainly that concern exists for the band, and that's, I think, the reality for artists. Of how to say what you want to say in a way that allows people to hear you. And I think the band has made a choice to stay and to make their livelihood in Cuba. And I think that's what you see over the course of the film is what that means. And the sacrifices and the challenges and the real balance of what it means to be an artist in Cuba is really what Zeus's story represents, and what I think was quite inspiring, quite fascinating, and quite challenging to capture.
It sure is. I don't know if there's an answer to this question, but do you think as an American filmmaker coming to shoot this movie that you were given a little bit more flexibility? Like if there was a Cuban filmmaker who wanted to tell Zeus's story, would they have maybe a harder path to follow?
I think it's a really interesting point, and it's something I've thought about a lot. And it was the last interview I did with Dione, who's the lead singer. I sort of asked the traditional filmmaker question at the end of an interview. In this case, at the end of 10 years worth of interviews, I said, Dione, we've been talking and I've been asking you questions for years now. I'm wondering if there's anything you haven't shared with me, or anything else you would like to say or make sure we include in this project. And he gets a little emotional. He says, I just want to thank you actually for telling this story and for coming to for recognizing our story, because here in Cuba I don't feel like our story has been told or our story has been respected. And I think the idea of an outsider coming in and recognizing Zeus for what they are, and this scene for what it is, was something that became quite clear. As soon as I saw them on stage, I knew that they were something special, but I think they've really struggled to be recognized in Cuba and within their own society, always sort of being seen as the freaks or the outsiders. For the band, it was almost a bit bittersweet that it was an American, an outsider, who came in and told their story. But of course, as with most documentaries, most storytelling comes from an outside. Someone always is on the outside telling a story on the inside and trying to capture and share what they find special in that.
Yeah, interesting point. I think all artists want a variety of maybe affirmations that sort of saying you're doing a good thing, and whether it's the sold out crowd or someone else kind of honoring what you're doing. I was curious. There's one thing that fascinates me is, and I've heard this before, the agency of rock. Now, Cuba has that organization, and the film, I don't want to spoil it, as a interesting wrinkle to that at the end. Of course, you have to stick around to see it, but just share briefly what that is, because I think even if you watch the documentary, you're thinking, my gosh, I can't wrap my head around that concept.
Yeah, and it's a distinctly sort of a Cuban situation that really speaks to the way that arts operates within official culture in Cuba, which is that they have this famous saying of that Fidel gave to the sort of intellectuals back in the 60s, that they were like, what can we say? We want to stay here, we want to make art, but how do we do this within the system? And Fidel said, everything outside is forbidden, everything inside is accepted. And that has sort of grown to be the understanding that as long as you're within the revolutionary system and not questioning the foundation of the revolution, it's permitted. And what you see is that over sort of the cultural history of the past 50, 60 years of revolutionary Cuba, Castro's Cuba, you see art very much being taken within the revolution. So things that were on the outside, for example, rock and roll in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, being brought into the revolution with an organization like the Agency of Rock, which was created in the 2000s as a way to create an official space for rock and roll. They created a venue called the Maxim Rock in downtown Havana, which serves as a way that rock and rollers can be professional. They can become government officials in a way to play their music, which in order to have a livelihood in Cuba, you have to, in order to be sort of part of in order to get paid, in order to have a sort of standing, you have to have some sort of official position. And the creation of the Agency of Rock provides that. So in that sense, the Agency of Rock has been created as a way of this music that used to be unorganized and used to be this rebellious sound that was seen as a capitalist influence has been sort of brought into the official revolutionary circle.
Gotcha. Now, you started this all with a short film. It's now a feature-length documentary.
Yeah.
When you start the project, I know you have certain expectations, certain themes you want to draw upon, certain maybe mini-narratives within the movie. Looking at sort of that compared to the finished product and what you actually shot on film and captured for the big screen, how different were those two visions?
I think in the end, where I wanted to make sure we captured a story that felt like you understood and went on a real proper journey with this band that has represented so much to this community, and also the band that represents so much to the artists themselves. So I think in the end, the film very much represents what my initial vision and dream was, which was to bring people into the intimate lives of these artists, a real sort of diverse spectrum of artists that are within the same band. I think what I didn't appreciate was the amount of time and the process that it would take to take a 10-minute film and make it a 75-minute film, over the course of 10 years and, many, many different production trips and a whole lot of effort and creativity on behalf of a whole large community of collaborators on this project.
Gotcha.
I very much didn't appreciate the process, which is a beautiful thing in itself. But in the end, I'm quite happy and feel like we landed in a place that does justice to their story, and I think tells an important story for everybody to connect with.
It certainly does. I was kind of curious, what do you think people should take away from Los Ultimos Frikis regarding socialism and the system under which the whole thing was shot? It's impossible to separate the two, but what would you what's the takeaway that you think audiences will have from that message?
I think what's important from a position of the sort of universal message of the story, what I take from it is is the importance of pursuing and the persistence of sticking to your voice and staying true to what you love, regardless of what the system or what people are sort of pushing down your throat or trying to force you into a different area. I think what you see over the course of the film is you see 5 artists who absolutely love what they do and have an incredibly difficult time doing it over the course of 3 decades. And I think that's a message that we all can connect with in the work that we all, in any sort of creative passion you have, is that people are going to make it difficult for you, and people are systems will try to crush you. And I think what you see at the end of the film is a group of people that have stuck to doing what they love and pursued it. And I think that's an inspiring message. And I think also the opportunity for people to see into Cuba and see what the distinct challenges and frustrations of life there over the course of the history, I think is an important thing. And certainly was a goal of mine, was to create a film that broke away from some of the traditional imagery that you see that's often quite oversimplified, whether that's the Buena Vista salsa imagery, or the idea of this sort of the great hope of the opening that has been dashed. I wanted to make sure we were presenting a complex and ultimately more true experience of what daily life is like as an artist in Havana.
With this project finally coming to an end, now the movie's on the festival circuit right now, I was going to you have a new project lined up, or is that still in development? What else can we expect from you in the next couple of years?
Yeah, I mean, I'm certainly super excited to begin sharing this project, and we just had our premiere in New York. We'll be screening in Havana quite soon for the band, and then we'll be out on the circuit and traveling, ideally bringing this story into theaters around the world, and then ideally into people's living rooms, so you too can bring a bit of Cuba into your home. And then for me on a personal level, I've got a couple different projects I'm excited about and pursuing, and certainly a through line of international sort of understanding and global storytelling in a way that connects to something that you can feel and relate to, regardless where you are, is really sort of a theme that I explore.
Well, you did just that with Los Ultimos Frikis. And again, thank you, Nick, for joining the HiTcast. Again, the film is Los Ultimos Frikis, and you can see where it's going to be heading next via the film's Facebook page. You can find the information and more links at the show notes page at hollywoodintoto.com. Nick, thanks so much. It's a really, really good movie. It's a powerful film, and it makes you think. It makes you appreciate the values and freedoms that we have in America, and hopefully more and more people around the globe will have just that as well. So thanks again for your time.
Exactly, and thank you so much for your time.
Well, thanks again for listening. Don't forget to check out hollywoodintoto.com for both the show notes and, of course, the latest entertainment news. Please follow me at Twitter at hollywoodintoto. And we'd love it if you leave a podcast review over at iTunes. See you next week.